This past week, Yankees general manager Brian Cashman made a special appearance on the Yes Network Hot Stove Show. And boy, was his interview interesting. For a 5-minute interview, we have a lot to discuss. We're going to break down Cashman's comments, especially regarding some of the Yankees' prominent players from 2020, and we're going to take a look and see maybe we could get some insight into the Yankees' thought process moving forward. All this and more on this brand new episode of the Pinstripe Talk podcast, which begins right now.
You are listening to the Pinstripe Talk podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Pinstripe Talk podcast, powered to you by Delahanty Media. I'm your host, Nick Delahanty. For those of you who are new to our show or new to our channel, we welcome you aboard. If you're a returning member, we thank you for taking more time out of your schedule to talk some Yankees baseball with us. We have a lot to talk about on today's show. This past week, the Yes Network hosted their annual Hot Stove Show, and Brian Cashman was a special guest. In an interview with Meredith Marakovitz, Cashman opened up a little bit on the Yankees' thought process regarding some of the team's prominent players from last year's roster. And some of his comments are rather interesting and could kind of lead you in a sense, or maybe even give you some insight as to how the Yankees are thinking moving forward. And we're going to talk about some of the main comments that Cashman made during that interview and more. Before we get going, remember to follow us on social media. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, it's right on the screen. For those of you who are listening on the audio side, we're on Facebook by searching up Pinstripe Talk Podcast, on Twitter at Pinstripe Talk ND, and on Instagram, Delahanty Media, and check out our website, www.delahantymedia.com, for all the latest news and updates regarding our brand as a whole. Let's kick this show off by talking about the Yankees' biggest question mark this offseason, and that's the status of DJ LeMahieu. Coming off 2 stellar seasons in the Bronx, that deal he signed 2 off-seasons ago turned out to be a tremendous steal for the New York Yankees. And if you're reading things on social media and listening to people talk, it seems like everybody is in the consensus that the Yankees want LeMahieu back and LeMahieu wants to return. However, that's not such a guarantee, given that the Yankees may not be willing to match his price tag. Let's hear what Cashman had to say in his Yes Network interview regarding DJ.
Like always, we're, ultimately come up with what's the best options, but we're going to exhaust his option first. Which is to try to keep him here. And he loves playing in New York. He loves playing for the New York Yankees and our fan base. And he clearly loves his teammates. And so there's a lot of things in our favor, but ultimately it comes down to the financial opportunity that we provide as it's measured to the financial opportunities that others are providing. And that's the big unknown, and only him and his family and his representation can navigate that.
Without a doubt, DJ LeMahieu is the New York Yankees' top priority this offseason. However, Brian Cashman in his comments made it very clear that if the price tag gets too high, the Yankees may bow out of the race. Obviously, they're going to try anything and everything to make it work. They love LeMahieu. LeMahieu loves being here. I think that both sides are going to be willing to work together to come up with a contract that fits the needs of both parties. However, there are teams out there that can afford to bring in LeMahieu at a big price. 5 years, $100+ million may be doable for some teams. The interesting thing to see is if these contract offers come in and the Yankees won't budge in regards to that 5th year. Ideally for the Yankees, you would love to get him at 4 years, anywhere from $20 to $25 million a year, because that still gives you a little bit more flexibility moving into 2021. But right now, it's a question mark. But based off Cashman's comments, that seems to be the biggest domino in place, because that really dictates the Yankees' offseason moving forward. Obviously, that's their top priority. It seems like that's going to be the number one thing they try to address this offseason. It will just remain to be seen if they could come up with a contract agreement to keep LeMahieu in the Bronx for a very long time. Like I stated earlier, DJ LeMahieu really dictates the Yankees' offseason. What happens with him is going to really determine what Brian Cashman and company are able to do with the remainder of the offseason as they try to build a World Series contender for 2021. One of the guys who are impacted is Masahiro Tanaka. Right-handed pitcher, just came off a 7-year deal with the Yankees, and unlike LeMahieu, Cashman's comments are a little bit different regarding Tanaka. We hear how much Cashman loves having LeMahieu around, how the Yankees love him, and how LeMahieu loves being in town. but it's a different tune in regards to the Japanese right-hander. Let's hear what Cashman had to say on the hot stove regarding Tanaka.
I don't think by rules of Major League Baseball and the union I'm allowed to answer who does or who doesn't or what does or what doesn't. I think we're supposed to be projecting complete secrecy on what we can and can't do, what is workable, what isn't workable. I think that's not supposed to be a transparent transaction. I think the game is supposed to be set up in a way that the players benefit from full protection, so they can extract as much perceived competition as there is in their contract negotiations with other clubs, and have everybody unknown about who's capable of doing more or less. And so I gotta stay silent on that question. I'm sorry.
Now that you heard what Cashman had to say about Tanaka, really different tune than what you heard a couple of minutes ago with Cashman talking about LeMahieu. Cashman was unwilling to give a comment really going into Tanaka. And if you're reading the writing on the wall, it appears that the Yankees' time with Tanaka is over. And obviously, if LeMahieu signs, they're going to be strapped for cap room, obviously, with the $210 million threshold coming up. But it just seems like the Yankees are willing and, at this point, okay with the fact that Tanaka may be pitching elsewhere. Number one, I don't think they're willing to meet the salary requirements that he will want or have the room to actually meet those needs. Number two, I think that they have more insight than we know about his injury history. Let's all not forget, his arm is a ticking time bomb. He has that partially torn UCL he's been dealing with for a couple of years now. Are the Yankees afraid that that's going to happen and it's just a matter of time before that explodes? Let's face it, they would have better information than anybody in the game about Tanaka. And based off Cashman's comments, it just seems like he doesn't want to really ruin Tanaka's market. Obviously, if he comes out and he says, we're not in a position where we're going to be in a bidding war for Tanaka, we don't really want him back, that lowers the player's value. That lowers the money that they may get on the open market. So I think that if you're reading into Cashman's comments here, the Yankees are all but out on Masahiro Tanaka, and it would probably take a real, and I mean really big hometown discount for Tanaka to stay. But on his comments, based on those comments, I just feel like he doesn't want to really ruin Masahiro's market because, let's face it, the guy was nothing but classy in New York. He was a really good, effective pitcher. But I just think the Yankees are ready to move on. And by making comments that, would indicate the Yankees are out on him, it would be a really big problem for Major League Baseball because it would eventually and essentially be hurting his overall market on the free agency track this offseason. Now, if you thought that the last topic with Tanaka was interesting, just buckle up because this one will really pique your interest. Brian Cashman was asked about Gleyber Torres as a whole regarding him playing shortstop, and the conversation kind of derailed a little bit. You're going to hear what Cashman had to say regarding their very young, talented player as a whole. And some of the comments that he's going to make in this are going to surprise you. Let's get to it.
I think he can do both. I think he's a better second baseman than shortstop. I think that he can play shortstop. I think that ultimately he struggled in the beginning of the pandemic 60-game season because he, after the spring training 1 shutdown into spring training 2, he did not, and I'm not playing a blame game, but he wasn't in the best shape to start the second spring training. So upon his return from the shutdown, we spent a little bit of a first half of the season playing catch up. Maybe it was the first 40 or 45 games of the season playing catch up. And once we got him back online and in shape, you saw towards the last 20 games, including the playoffs, the Gleyber Torres we're used to seeing. So I think the season that overall he had isn't representing what he really is. It's more along the lines of what you saw in the postseason and what you saw the previous year, which anybody would want. So he's more than capable of playing short, but I acknowledge he's a better second baseman than a shortstop.
The two major topic points that were discussed were, number one, Gleyber Torres coming into the second spring training or summer camp, whatever you want to call it, not in shape. And the second thing, and the more important thing we're going to talk about, is that Brian Cashman admitted that Gleyber Torres is a better second baseman than he is a shortstop. Let's start with the out-of-shape thing. As Cashman said in the video, obviously he's not throwing the blame game because obviously it was a different kind of time and teams and players were dealing with a lot of different things. There was doubt there was going to even be a season. So to blame Gleyber for coming into camp not so much in shape, I'm sure that he's not the only one. Now, obviously, Gleyber's got to do a better job of staying in shape, first and foremost. Hopefully it's a little bit of a wake-up call for him because we saw how much he struggled, especially early on. But that cannot happen. Hopefully it's a learning lesson for him as he, matures and grows a little bit and gets better with age. That cannot happen. And, the biggest thing, and Michael Kay said it on this exact show, and I have to agree with him. If he came into the original spring training out of shape, that would be more of a concern for me. However, it was after that shutdown and there was question about the season going, and I'm sure guys struggled to find places to work out and things like that. So to be a little out of shape, and not that I'm saying it's acceptable, but it's understandable if that makes any sense. And obviously I'm sure the Yankees have Gleyber working out and keeping him in shape because I think that they learned from this experience. I think Gleyber did too, and I expect him to come into spring training this year being healthy and being the player the Yankees know he can be. Now, Cashman openly admitting that he's a better second baseman than shortstop does raise some question marks for me. Number one, how does this affect DJ LeMahieu's signing? If you sign LeMahieu for a 5-year deal or a 4-year deal, what happens if you determine down that stretch that Gleyber cannot handle shortstop every day? Do you trade a Luke Voigt and play LeMahieu at first, or do you play LeMahieu all over the diamond and use him as a $25 million plus utility man? I don't know how that works out, but that's something you have to really keep an eye on. And now, if the Yankees don't re-sign DJ LeMahieu, how do the Yankees attack this offseason? Do they move Gleyber Torres back to second base and sign a 1-year type of rental at short? Maybe a Simmons or a Gregorius, or somebody who could come in and handle the position for a year before that really dynamic free agent group of shortstops comes into the free agent market next year. Or do they trade for a guy like Francisco Lindor and sell, part of the farm to get him? The price tag may not be that high because he's only on a 1-year deal, but you're still going to have to give up something to get something. Or do they try a 1-year trial basis again to see if Gleyber could handle the position? Maybe a little more experience, the Yankees will give him that opportunity to shine. You sign a second baseman to kind of fill the void that LeMahieu leaves. My vote is Tommy La Stella from, the Oakland Athletics, if you're going to go that route. But again, I don't know what the Yankees are thinking in regards to their thought process there. So there's a lot of things to digest here. And Cashman coming out and saying that Gleyber is a better second baseman than a shortstop does raise some concerns for me. Overall, I do think that over time, Gleyber's going to move back to second base. I think that they're going to look at this experiment and say, look, Gleyber's better at second base. There's less pressure being the second baseman. He really thrived in that role. I think that they're going to come back and they're going to say, look, we're going to find a shortstop that could complement him well, and we're going to move him back to the position where he broke into our system in our big leagues and keep him there for the long haul. The only question is, how does it affect LeMahieu? And there's so many dynamic pieces that go into play here that are affected. I think that we're not going to have an answer to this until DJ LeMahieu signs, whether it's with the Yankees or elsewhere. That's going to be the big determination as to what they do with Gleyber Torres. If LeMahieu's back, Gleyber's your opening day shortstop. If LeMahieu's not back, that's when it becomes interesting. And that's when we could see some dominoes fall into place where the Yankees say, look, we have the opportunity to move him now. Let's do it. And then bank on getting one of those top-name shortstops in the free agent market next year. But when you're looking at the comments that Brian Cashman made, I think that this is the most interesting story because, number one, we didn't know Gleyber came into summer camp out of shape. They kept that very hush-hush. And for him to admit that just shows that, it did bother the Yankees a little bit. It was a reason why he struggled. So, obviously you can't blame him being out of shape for the struggles that's on the player essentially. But overall, you have to look at that and say, that cannot happen again. And the other thing is him admitting that Gleyber's a better second baseman than shortstop. I think we all knew that already, but hearing it come out of Brian Cashman's mouth kind of just adds a whole new dynamic to it, because I think that now the Yankees understand that and see that and are really toying with the idea of moving him back to second base. But we're going to have to wait and see how the offseason plays out, because, let's face it, LeMahieu holds all the cards right now for this Yankee team. And we're not going to have an answer on Gleyber until that domino falls into place. The final topic that we're going to talk about in regards to Cashman's interview is in regards to Gary Sanchez. And Meredith Marakovitz asked Cashman, what's the deal with Gary Sanchez? Are you going into opening day thinking that Gary is the opening day catcher? Or will he have to fight to regain his starting role? Hear what the GM had to say regarding Gary.
I mean, yeah. I think going into the season next year, we'll let it play out regardless. But there's certainly an anticipation and expectation of a bounce back for Gary Sanchez. The talent level is there. We're only a year removed from what an All-Star, American League All-Star catcher, a perennial 30-plus home run hitter.
Obviously, Brian Cashman's comments regarding Gary Sanchez should not surprise you by any means. When the Yankees tendered him a contract, that just showed that Gary is their catcher of the future, at least for next year. They think that he could have a breakout year. They think he could get back on track. Let's remember, this guy was an all-star player who had 30 home run, 100 RBI potential. You don't just give up on that. And yes, the strikeout rate is high. He doesn't put the ball in play nearly as much as the Yankees need him to. There are defensive woes, but I think that the extra work in the Winter League and, getting him into shape and having him ready for spring training will be a big thing for Gary Sanchez. He'll have to come in and he'll have to compete to earn playing time and to be the Yankees catcher. Kyle Higashioka showed that he can handle the responsibilities when given more playing time. But I think that we're in line to see a Gary Sanchez breakout year, and the Yankees are hopeful that's the case because that makes their team that much better. Yes, we need him to put the ball in play more, but when he puts the ball in play, he's lethal. Look at the numbers. Go on StatCast. The guy hits the ball hard. You got to put the ball in play, though. And that's a major thing, and I think that Gary's working on these things to get back on track. But you don't just give up on Gary Sanchez. Brian Cashman made that very, very clear. Gary Sanchez is a part of the New York Yankees' future, and they hope that he could be their backstop for a very long time. Well, that's going to wrap up today's show. A really fun one to kind of break down Brian Cashman's comments on the Yes Network's Hot Stove Show. Credit to the Yes Network Hot Stove for the video footage of Cashman speaking. You could check out their page by going to the link in our description. If you're watching on our video stream, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If not, if you're on the audio platforms, make sure you subscribe and comment and review on any podcasting platform that you so choose. As always, thank you for taking some time to listen to us and talk some Yankees baseball with us. And as always, let's go Yankees. We'll talk to you really soon. Take care, everyone.